Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a great end of the week. I know we are in that time where spring break is about to hit. So if you are a student listening to this podcast, you're probably like, yay, let's go on spring break. Let's have fun, which usually fun means going to a beach, going overseas, or just staying at home and playing video games or watching TV all day and just hanging out with your friends. If you're a parent, you're thinking, "Oh, great! I now have my kids home for a week. What the heck am I going to do with them?" But luckily for me, I'm going to be traveling in a couple of weeks for my spring break, since my kids will be out, and we're going to do some fun family stuff. So that will be exciting for me. But joining me today is Micah Current, who is not on spring break. Micah, how are you doing today?
I'm good. However, I do get a spring break next week. It's I have to work. I don't get like a spring. I get a spring break from my classes, but I still have to go to work. But it's a break for us because the students will be gone and the campus will be a lot less crazy, which is a much needed break from faculty, staff, and students, which is nice. It's like that over the summer too, which and winter break where it's like a ghost town, but you can get to things on campus without having a line that's like out the door because there's so many students. So I get a spring break. However, I'm not traveling. I have one of my classes this semester. I have a couple of projects that are going to be due at the end of the semester, so I'm going to take my spring break to work ahead and get those projects done so that I don't have to do them at the end of the term, which is probably what you should do, but you're going to go to Disney World or something.
No, I'm not going to Disney World. I'm going to New Orleans and hitting a Disney cruise.
Close enough. It had Disney in the word.
Disney was in the title.
See,
and speaking of and speaking of titles,
I got confused.
have you ever put the word fun and fundraiser? Because we will be talking about the topic of fundraising today. But before we dive into that topic, stories gone wild. So, Micah, I want to tell you the craziest thing I heard yesterday. So, to set the story up, we have like most students, they like to procrastinate a lot. And I'm now getting an overflow of emails and parent phone calls saying, hey, my student needs community service hours for National Honor Society. We need help, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We need credit. We need hours. What can you do for us? It's like, okay, well, I have a lot of stuff. Big older churches means they house a lot of garbage, which means a lot of stuff to navigate, sort through. So we're going through the youth lounge, and we have a bunch of like drawers. So I have a couple of students cleaning stuff up, rearranging stuff, and they're done. And we ended up pulling up like a bunch of tubs full of like these costumes. Years ago, the church that I work at used to do these big, gigantic youth musicals in the spring, and they just would, just be a big thing. So we found like a bunch of these like felt skirts that had like images on them that they're supposed to look like poodle skirts. Okay. So we're having youth, and a couple of the girls see these things. They're like, what are they? I'm like, oh, they're poodle skirts. And here, let me show you. So I go and I put one on and show them like how do you assemble it and everything. They're like, oh, so, they're putting these on. And literally I had a girl go, yeah, poodle skirts were very popular in the 90s. And I said, you mean the 50s? And she goes, oh, well, yeah, it might be a little bit older, like the 80s. And literally her friend had to Google it, poodle skirts. And a thing popped up, said these were popular in the 50s.
Mm.
The 50s. And this girl's like, well, Google's wrong sometimes. Google's wrong sometimes. So
Google's wrong when people want it to be wrong.
yeah, Google's wrong when it wants to be wrong. It's like, so I'm just sitting here like beside myself, like poodle skirts were popular in the 90s. Like, so I'm just sitting there thinking, and then not only that, but we were playing a game, which it's called You Laugh, You Lose. And there's these different things that you have to try to get everyone to laugh. And one of them was dance like a hillbilly. and none of my students knew what a hillbilly was, which I'll give that to them because that's not a term that's usually just randomly thrown around all the time. Yeah, hillbilly.
Well, and to be fair, you guys live Columbus, which is, the center of the state, big city versus, rural, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast Ohio.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If I was in Southeast Ohio and I pulled that, I said hillbilly, they'd be like, "That's offensive. That's what I am." Or you go
Yeah.
to, or you go to like West Virginia or Virginia, where you are living in the hills. They're like, "Yep, goodness." So that was my
Mount,
story. Wow.
mountain, mountain people.
The mountain men. Yeah. Which is funny because living in the mountains, it's weird because sometimes people think like, "Oh, mountains, big, gray, stony, white capped." It's like, nope, that's
No.
out on the west. If you have to Appalachians, it's all like trees growing on these mountains. It's all green and lush. So it's weird that the different mountain systems we have in the United States are completely different from east and west. It's like their own little like East Coast West Coast battle. That's a '90s reference. So anyway, Micah, what's your weird story?
Well, well, before I get to that, I think it's interesting how trends, clothing wise, fashion wise,
Mm-hmm.
will, like circulate. And so,
Yeah.
like, in the last, 2, 3 years, kids are really dressing like it's the 90s again,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they'll have hairstyles like the 90s. I have student workers at Miami, and they would come in, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you look like something out of Saved by the Bell. And they're like, what's Saved by the Bell? And I'm like, oh, I feel so old. But, you know, it's true. The way that they're, the mom jeans, those became a thing again. I'm starting to see baggy holy jeans again. Like that was high school for me. Like everybody wore baggy jeans, and everybody, used to run the bottom out of their, the base of their jeans. But now you can buy them that way, Scott. Like I can buy a pair of jeans for $40 with 20 holes in it. And it's like, why would I do that? Why would I buy jeans that had, holes put them in already in there for me? So like that. And then, have you seen the fanny packs make a comeback?
Yes.
They're not wearing them in the right place, but they're a
Yeah.
thing again because they wear them across their chest. They don't wear them on their waist like like you or
Yeah, it's
I
like a
would back in the
satchel.
90s. Yes.
A satchel.
So
Real
so
natural
anyway,
20.
yes. So I'm just amazed. And then people were like, "Oh, this is a new thing." I'm like, "No, it was a thing 20 years ago." Uh, but I guess my story, I have, it's kind of a story with a question for you.
Okay.
And I haven't even told you about this yet, but it's kind of
Okay.
interesting. So yesterday, I'm scrolling through social media, and I'm scrolling through, um, which I think you might have seen this on social, so you may know the story. But just for privacy and namesake and church sakes, we're just not going to mention names of churches. So scrolling through social, scrolling through different churches live streams yesterday, and I came across somebody saying they were going to resign from their church, but they're taking a different position at another church. But they went from being a lead pastor, and they're going to be a family life pastor, similar to your situation, similar to your journey. Um, and the person, and I guess this isn't really a story going wild. It's more of an observation slash question and inquiry
Mm-hmm.
for you. But the person made this statement when they were telling their church that they were leaving, that they spent the last 5 years or so as a lead pastor, and they feel like they can serve better in the number two role, being an associate, serving the lead pastor. When you left, you felt, well, two things. One, you left. There was a kind of a break in your ministry before coming back into full time ministry,
Yeah.
like a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
Your story is a little bit different. You took a job, you felt called to your job, but your job was basically what you could find versus, you know what I mean? Like you're a family, director of family
Yeah.
ministries. Would you be a lead pastor again? Or do you feel like, hey, I am suited for this, second string, number two position, associate role, however you want to frame it, versus
Yeah.
being that lead pastor? Or do you think that your days as lead pastor are over? Because yeah, that same person was like, I'm tired. I just don't think like, and it's not like it's the great resignation conversation, but it's like, it's
Yeah.
almost like, okay, I'm gonna take this other role so that I can just kind of coast and feel like I'm more comfortable versus being, does that make sense?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I don't necessarily. So for me, in my situation, like I was applying for lead pastor. I was
Everything.
basically applying for a lead pastor role, youth leader role, children's pastor role, really what was in my skill set. So,
Right.
and I think that goes to and I think, my view of calling is not that the sky's going to open up and a dove's going to fly down and I'm going to hear this big booming voice from the cloud saying, Scott, you are now called in this season of your life. You are going to be a lead pastor or a family minister. Like, no, like for me, it's like, well, if God has called me to ministry, I'm going to be, that's the call. The call is ministry, period.
Right.
Where God wants me to be in ministry is up to God's discretion of where I serve. And if this season it's
Yeah.
best for me to take a number 2 role or a number 3 role and be a family minister and not be the lead, I'm perfectly fine with that. Uh, if the Lord wanted me to be the lead, I would be fine with that too. But I think a lot of it goes to the sense of, okay, being obedient and kind of going through the waves. Because if I was a very big, staunch, I need to be a Church of God lead pastor, and I can't find a Church of God job because their Church of God job site is down, and you can't get anything, and you start sending your letter to other state directors to help you find church jobs and you get ghosted, then that's kind of okay, well, is that a God thing or is that just more of a neglect thing that is not part of my part, but on those who are supposed to help me find positions within states or within the Church of God?
Yeah. And and I'm not, I don't want it to sound at all like it's a downgrade or anything, because a calling's a calling is a calling, and like you nailed
Yeah.
it on the head, saying, it's ministry, period. It's not lead pastor, children's pastor, worship pastor, youth pastor, assimilation pastor, whatever, executive pastor. It's a calling, and it's ministry is ministry is ministry. And so I guess we haven't really went into the great deal, like we've hinted and kind of talked around the whole topic of the Great Resignation, and how pastors are just tired and they wanted to, do you think, and I don't know this guy's story. I don't know, I know your story, but like, you know, going through the whole COVID thing is really persuaded a lot of pastors to go either out of ministry, or, like to take that number 2 slot to be an associate and not really want to be the lead anymore, because the pressure of making the decisions, and I would argue that the pressure of those decisions were um, greater than pretty much the history of ministry, probably, during
Yeah.
the COVID season, as far as
Mm-hmm.
like, do we have church, do we not have church, do we shut this place down, do we continue to take offerings, do we continue to have services online, like all those pivotal decisions to keep the church going during a time where there was so much
Yeah.
uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
It's I wonder if that, is weighing on a lot of, not even just this person that I was talking about or referencing, but like pastors in general, um,
Mm-hmm.
as to why they're taking other roles, or they're not doing, the lead thing anymore.
Yeah. And I would say, and I would even just say maybe it's not necessarily they don't want to be the lead anymore because of the pressure and all the responsibility stuff. I think in some cases, maybe those lead pastors who take a number 2 position means that they could be more effective because now they don't have to go to every single meeting that there is. And a lot of that extra time, they can do that to actually, build up their
Spend time with their
marriages, build
family.
up their families, or go and do the one thing that churches have failed to do during the pandemic, was to really make meaningful impact with families in their community, especially in their greatest time of need. And when they're struggling and it seems like, they want the church to kind of, you know, encourage them, enlighten them, help them out, kind of be these shepherds. And then it's like, well, they don't even make phone calls within the first 3 months of the shutdown to even check on people to see if they're
Mm-hmm.
okay. Then that kind of becomes a sticking point.
Right. And it's yeah, we had that conversation early on in the COVID era
Yeah.
when, I had a friend at a church in Missouri, and he got with his staff and he was like, "Look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to print a spreadsheet out of everybody that has attended this church in the last year to 3 years, and you're going to take a quarter of it. I'm going to take a quarter of it. You're going to take a quarter of it. I'm going to take a quarter of it, and we're all going to call these people and we're going to see how they're doing, and just want to check in with them and see if there's anything we can do for them during this difficult time." And he said as a result of that, um, giving was consistent, if not better. Online attendance was, consistent, if not better, as a result of, staying connected with those people. And so,
Yeah.
um, one of the biggest things that I learned about, kind of stepping down and stepping away from ministry was the the burnout that really existed in my life and in my soul. My marriage wasn't in trouble by any means, but I one of the things I appreciate so much more now is how much time I get to spend with my spouse and not have to worry about the stress of the everyday um, calling that goes along with that ministry assignment, because it's brutal, and you have to be super intentional about, like, you know what, you have to pick and choose your battles, right? But you need to be able to say, hey, no, I'm going to go take my wife out on a date, or I'm going to go spend some time with my kids, or I'm going to, you know, be intentional about being home in time for dinner every night. My dad wasn't always great at that growing up, and he was always busy with ministry, busy with church, busy with meetings, busy with state level stuff. And it was like, you're rolling in at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and your family's not having dinner together. And
Yeah.
so I never want to do that to my spouse. I never want to do
Mm-hmm.
that, to my children, to people that, I care about. Like, and I probably, and Scott, I would probably venture to, feel, and, I've known you for a while, but I feel like you would, feel the same way about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know we went down quite the rabbit trail with that, but we're going
Hey,
to
no,
talk
it's
about something.
okay. It's all right. No, I mean,
It
it's
was just
important.
something that I thought about last night. Like, there's this whole topic of, like, the Great Resignation, but then, like, you know, are people just taking other positions within the church, or even stepping back, getting a secular job and volunteering because they want to spend more time with their family and not, have to deal with the weight of the decisions that go along with, um, pastoral ministry, especially in the lead pastor role.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and again, we don't have to talk about our topic today. This could be our topic right now,
no,
but
we are talking about this topic today because my friend, you're gonna talk about it because we've been stalling on it for like 6 months.
I know. But no, I think that's something more to kind of process and chew on, because there might be a lot there to unpack in a future episode with
Yeah,
this, and especially I think it's not only for those in ministry, but even those who are volunteers or just regular church folks, or even elders and deacons and bishops. Like, they have to realize that, hey, there's another, you know sometimes your pastors, they have lives too outside the church, just like you do. And sometimes, having a 3-hour meeting is not always the best policy.
right.
But all right. So today we're going to talk about the topic of fundraising. Now, I guess, kind of, depending on if you see the title of this episode, you're thinking, oh, great, you're going to talk about different fun ways of trying to get funds to help fund certain things. Not really. This is not that. This is not that episode. Maybe
That's
we'll get, but I want to talk about fundraising as a way of seeing how it has evolved and changed, and especially not necessarily the tactics or the methods, but the heart of the issue of fundraising. So, Micah, when you growing up in the church, anytime when there was a fundraiser, what was always your experience with kind of the theology of fundraising, or maybe the philosophy of fundraising, and kind of why we do fundraising and what it's usually for?
Well, first of all, I thought you were going to say, let's do an infomercial for the Scott Stedman podcast. We need your help. No,
Oh, yeah, right.
like,
No, I mean, hey,
no,
there's,
we're good.
I do have, I mean, I do have a Ko-fi account where if you want to donate to the Scott Stedman, but it's not like I'm pushing it too much. Like I mean,
Right.
we do have one person who has been giving faithfully to the Scott Stedman podcast, so it's been nice. Actually,
Yeah.
technically two, if we want to get really real, but one, as far as monthly, has been doing a great job and has kind of helped with, paying for these Zoom fees and stuff for these podcasts. But so thank you, Patty. Shout out to Patty for supporting the Scott Stedman podcast.
As far as fundraising is concerned, you can look at it a couple of different lights. Growing up in a church, growing up in a pastor's home, and growing up in the local community where my dad was a pastor, it was, are we just sticking to fundraising, or are we sticking to budget and fundraising?
Let's just
Because
stick with fundraising. Let's not even worry about budgets.
Well, I'm just saying the reason what I wanted to say, I guess, is that so growing up, the way that I understood it was that the church had a budget. They tried to stick to the budget. They tried to stick their bet. They paid the bills. They did the building fund. They did all the things that utilities, mortgage payment, anything that had to be associated with the church, the physical location itself, went through the budget. My understanding that was that anything extra beyond those bills needed to be fundraised for. And so the youth group had to take a trip to state youth convention. You had to fundraise the money. Youth group had to take a trip to international youth convention, had to raise the money. So they would have like a bake off or a dinner after church, or they would sell candy bars. They would sell popcorn. They would do things very, very similar to with Girl Scouts with cookies, or Boy Scouts with popcorn, or whatever it is. By the way, Girl Scouts are like everywhere these days, like hounding people to buy cookies. They're everywhere. They're like in parking lots. They're in stores. They're at the university I work at. They're everywhere. So, and I'm like, I already bought some. Leave me alone. But the idea of fundraising was anything above and extra to what your church budget would do. So I don't know if that's kind of what you're talking about, but also I was gonna say too, if there was something broke at the church and they couldn't afford it, you're gonna have to raise the money to fix it. If the worship team wanted to do in-ear monitors and have an in-ear monitor system that was $5,000 to $10,000 above their budget, they would have to raise the money somehow to make that happen. And in the churches that I've worked in, I've been told, hey, if you want the money, we don't have it, go sell. You talked about service hours for your student ministry, Scott, but go clean a closet out and sell that 20-year-old PA system and get $500 out of it. Well, that's if your budget, your fundraising goal was $2,000, there's a fourth of it right there. So I remember one year, I think it was 2017 or 2018, I raised $5,000 of just selling junk in the old closet. And I just sold it on Facebook Marketplace. I sold it on different church worship groups that I was a part of. eBay. What's the other one? Not eBay. PayPal, maybe. Can you sell stuff on PayPal?
No, PayPal's just the money laundering
system. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. It's money. Did you say
maybe
money laundering?
Maybe that sounds like maybe shady for PayPal. I do apologize, PayPal.
Did you just say money laundering?
Money laundering confirmation. Yeah, Facebook Marketplace. There's eBay. Yes, there's a Mercy. There's a lot of different
Reverb.com. There's some music stuff. So anyway, I would sell and do things like that. But again, that's the way that I looked at fundraising, but the way that you're looking at me, I think you want to take fundraising a different direction.
Well, no, I think it makes sense because if you think about, if you have a church that has a budget, let's kind of go based on your thing. You kind of what you were taught or what was modeled to you. you have a budget. Churches have budgets. So the things that they can pay for, they have to factor in, like things that are set, like gas, electric, water, salaries, those sorts of things. And then maybe you might have some extra things like, oh, office supplies, mowing fees, all that stuff. But then anytime when you have something that's extra within reason, so for an example, I mean, here's the thing, like let's say you have a nice office copier and your copier breaks, and really you find out you have someone come investigate it, and it's going to be a repair, and just with labor and tax and the parts to fix the copying machine, that's going to be $250. A lot of times churches are going to be like, yeah, we'll pay that. We'll pay the $250. Like, because you can't really budget in unexpected things that's going to happen. Right. But I mean, if your furnace goes out and it's the dead of winter, it's not going to be like, okay, let's do a fundraiser because we don't have the money to buy a new furnace. You're buying a new furnace because you have to heat up your building for people to come and worship, you know, that sort of thing. You may later do a fundraiser to kind of pay the debt off that, but for the most part, you're pretty good. See, and I think that's kind of like my big thing. Like when it came to fundraising for me, fundraising was more of a thing that had to do with any type of trips, right? So if a youth going to a convention, they had to fundraise for that. If youth wanted to go, you know, if we were going to go and play, if we were going to go and play miniature golf, we didn't have to fundraise for miniature golf, but I mean, kids would have to pay for it. That wasn't something that the church was going to pay. They weren't going to pay for kids to go play miniature golf. You were going to pay to be part of this big gathering to do miniature golf. Even like, for example, capital campaigns that churches do. Hey, we're going to do this big capital campaign, which means we're going to redo the carpet in the sanctuary. We're going to do this, or we're going to raise funds. And it's not necessarily we're going to go bake cookies and sell them so we can replace our carpet. It mainly was, here's this extra fund. And then kind of with your tithe, if you're tithing your a tenth, this is more extra money to throw into something for this to make it happen. And usually there's like an incentive, like maybe you'll get like a gold plate stapled into a gold nail stapled into the carpet that has your name on it, which we'll get into that later. But for fundraising, it was always
idolatry.
I do. And yet, I'm sure you can walk into any church building and there's probably a classroom or a fellowship center that is named after somebody because they gave the most money for that particular capital campaign. I mean, they used to pay. I remember looking at an old thing and they had pew tax where you sat in a pew, you paid tax. So that's why people are so, like, literally you pay tax to kind of help keep the pews refurbished, I guess. But back then it was just wood, so I don't know what to do, like sand them and stain them so the splinters didn't get in your butt. Like, I don't know. But anyway,
probably so.
Probably so. So, or just it's a tax is basically saying, hey, you can't sit in my pew because I pay for this. Like, but the problem I have with fundraising is anytime when there was a fundraiser, you knew where it was going, right? If the youth was going on a big missions trip, we're buying holiday cookies. We are having this spaghetti dinner. We're having this fundraiser because we are going to send our youth group to this national convention where they're going to do a missions trip and they're going to, have this experience with God and worship God with 5,000 other students from around the world. Okay, that's something exciting. And usually a lot of times people can buy into that and they say, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. The thing where I have a problem with fundraising is if you're doing a fundraiser and you're not explicitly telling people where that fund's going to go. That's my first issue. My second issue is if you're doing a fundraiser and the fundraiser is mainly to raise funds for your operation budget. The thing that you have budgeted for, you're now doing a fundraiser to make sure that you are making budget. And I have an issue with both of those things when it comes to fundraising.
Don't know if I have much to say to that.
So
I mean,
so let's go with so let's go with the first thing. Like when if I was like at a previous church I used to work at, we do a kind of an indoor yard sale. And every time when we would do any promotion or we would put stuff out, we always put in our flyers, in our material, even when people came here, this is to support youth ministry at the church, for them to go on youth functions, missions trips, conventions, youth functions, etc. It was clearly defined that this is what it is. This church would also, probably within the last few years, this church would then do a fall festival, which was a bake sale, a silent auction, a craft show, and then even like it was kind of like a yard sale too. It was like a collection of everything. And they'd have this event, but they would never say exactly in any print material or anybody to the people who were coming in, who were participating in it, that was in the community, where's the money to this going to?
Mm-hmm.
And the money that this was going to was mainly going to their main operation budget. Which, in contrast, the church that I was attending when I was still in Virginia, they were doing a fall festival, but they said, hey, you could bring, here's this fun thing. We're going to have inflatables. We're going to have food. We're going to have all this stuff. But here's the thing we want you to do. If you want to bring money, you can. Or here's a list of items for tools, because what we're going to do is we are going to build a house in our community for somebody to live. And if you can't build, here's some tools to help people that build this house. And they're partnered with Habitat for Humanity. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I know exactly what this fundraiser is for. It's to help people in the community. Even if they said this is a fall festival and we're going to do this because our kids are going to go on a missions trip to Kenya, great. I know what this is for. Hey, our church is having a fall festival, and here's all the cool stuff we're going to do. Awesome. But where's the money going to?
Yeah.
And that was the thing. Like once that fall festival was over with, you know, that following Sunday or 2 Sundays, you get to hear kind of what happened.
Yeah, youth group raised $2,500.
Yeah. So imagine you're surprised when you're sitting in church and you say, hey, our fundraiser raised $10,000 for our operation expense. And people start clapping and cheering.
Yeah,
yay, we get to pay our electric bill. And
yeah,
so,
it's supposed to be for the
here's
youth.
Or yay, we get to you know,
renovate the bathroom.
Even if you're going to renovate a bathroom, at least say what it's for, at least to the public. But or even saying, hey, we're doing a big remodeling project for the church. I mean, because here's the thing: if I bet you anything, if you went out and you said, hey, we're going to do this fundraiser to bring community people into the church, and the funds is so we can remodel our bathrooms, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to come anyway because they're like a good bargain, so they want to go and get stuff. But I'm sure there's some people who are going to be like, no, I think I'm going to go to the other one where we're going to help for a house to be built for a family who lost their house in a fire. We're going to go to that fall festival, not the one for this church who needs to renovate their bathroom. Like, I mean, am I crazy? But here's the thing. I feel like from the time I was in youth group to the time I'm an adult now, I just almost feel like everybody does a fundraiser and they're not being transparent with what the funds is going through, unless it is a youth fundraiser or a women's ministry fundraiser, or it is something like they're very expressive with what it's for. And I have a big issue with transparency in general. Like, I think that transparency is key, but the fact that you are asking people to participate in a fundraising event and you're not explicitly telling people at the fundraiser, these are where the money that you are giving to us, this is where it is going to.
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you, Scott, like money and churches make me really nervous anyway. And so for a variety of reasons, just because I think I've told the story in this show before, but there was a pastor at a church I worked at that embezzled like 40 grand of the church's money. But like, so like I get super nervous about money in churches anyway, because it's not mine to be, messing around with. So, you talk about the whole conversation about being good stewards of God's money, and to your point about not knowing where certain funds are going, when, how, and where, it's kind of suspect, to be honest with you. And so, I kind of see what you're saying, because like if you think about it in the lens of, okay, the church has a general operations budget or a general fund, and let's just say, I don't know, your checking account of the church has $125,000, and your youth group does a fundraiser and you raise $5,000, and so now you're just dumping that money into the general fund, and it kind of gets sucked into the vortex of like, okay, are you really going to give the youth group that $5,000 that they earned, or are you going to put it in a separate fund, or do they have their own account? I know churches do it a variety of different ways, right? One motto is like, oh, we just have one big pot and we just draw from that pot. So like, you have the checkings and we have a savings, and we just do just the big pot. And so when there's a need or the bills need paid, we just take from that pot. And another circumstance, I've seen it where student ministry has their fund, worship ministry has their fund, children's ministry has their fund, the general general operating budget has their fund, and then if there's building maintenance or a building fund or whatever you want to call it, they have their fund. And so like when things arise, like youth are taking a trip or they do a fundraiser, as you're talking about, and we use this illustration for the show, they raise that $5,000. That $5,000 gets deposited to that account, right? Not the general fund, not the youth. I'm sorry, not the children's, not the worship, but the youth fund. And so I think that's a better way to keep track of your funds personally, whereas if you're just throwing it all in one pot, and everybody just be able to grab that money whenever they need it, it's it's kind of suspect, like you're saying. So where is that money truly going? And that goes back to the whole conversation about budget, even though you didn't really want to go down that direction or that avenue. But like it's true. Like if you don't have a good person in your church that handles finances or handles the books, then it's no wonder that stuff. And it could be just an old school way of doing things. We have a checking account, we have a savings account. When the youth needs that money, we'll get it out. But what if something happens between the time that you raise the money, the youth takes their trip, and you need to let's just say they raise $5,000. We keep using $5,000 in this illustration. The church, I don't know, the water heater breaks, and the water heater is going to be $4,500, and you only have $5,700 in your account, right? And you spent all you have on the new water heater for the church because you need it. But then, by the way, the youth trips next month, you only have like a couple $100 left. Like, then what are you going to do for the kiddos that raised all that money?
Yeah. So and that's I think even that illustration, it goes back to, if you bring up two major questions. First of all, the skill of the person who's handling your budget and how they approach it, because sometimes there's not like a clear-cut written rule on how the church budget needs to be done. And even if someone is a CPA or is in finance, they have their own way and their own system of doing it, and it could change depending on who's actually keeping the books of the church, especially if it's a volunteer of the church, or even if you're outsourcing it to an accounting firm. The second thing is the idea of integrity, because if the youth if everything's coming out of one account, and the youth raised $5,000 and they now have their entire trip paid in full, the water heater breaks. What's more important to the church? Sending our kids to a conference to grow in their faith with the Lord and maybe feel a call to ministry, and or kind of get this leadership training to kind of grow in their faith and build a bonding experience within the youth group, or the water heater. And when you have those two dilemmas, 95% of the time, it's going to go to, well, we need the water heater. So sorry, teens, you're not going to convention this year because we had money, now we don't. Mm-hmm. And basically they just took their money that they raised to kind of help pay for the water heater. So bathroom toilets can flush and sinks can turn on. And that I feel is very, or we send the youth and then we take $5,000 out of the pastor's salary. And now the pastor's getting paid $5,000 less because we have to pay for the water heater. Because whether you realize it or not, or you're kissing the butt of the wealthiest person within the church to say, hey, can you please pay for this water heater? It broke and we want to send our kids to youth. And depending on their mercy, they may say, yeah, and they give the $5,000. And then, you have and then an anonymous donor paid for it, which is great. And I think that is also good. But very rarely do you have churches like that where you have someone who is an anonymous donor that will say, yeah, I will pay the entire cost of the repair or the installation, the service fees, and even the water heater, and pay for all of that. Like, very rare will you find that in a very small congregation.
I remember too,
like, be that generous to do something like that.
I remember, speaking of the pastor's salary, I remember growing up, there were times where the budget was tight at the church that my dad would work at, and we talked, I think, in an episode a couple of weeks ago about, Wednesday night prayer meeting. And so, like, I remember, like, a time when Sunday night church was still prevalent. And so, like, the person that would do their finances or count the money or do the books, like, would do that Sunday night after service. And so, like, because they worked an 8 to 5 job during the week. So that was the only time they really could do it. So I remember walking in and they were like, I don't know, Pastor Chris, I don't know if we're going to be able to, pay your full check today, because they were cutting it that close. Because giving was down, or there was something that came up. And like you said, Scott, the pastor may or may not get their check. And if they do get their check, it may not be the full check or the full amount. So, I think that's a whole nother conversation as far as, how can we budget better as a church?
Well, yeah,
as a nonprofit.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing. And this is, I don't want to get too far into budgeting, because that's going to be a whole. I feel like even like we're still talking about kind of funds with fundraising and stuff, and then that in the budgets too. That even talk about church budgets, a whole different beast to tackle, because there's a whole different mentality of how you approach a church budget. Going to, it is a strict thing and we do not change, to, the very first church I ever worked at when I was a bivocational pastor, the treasurer would always explain to people that the budget is a livable, breathable thing, and that there has to be some flexibility within the budget, because if we are hard line on the budget on every single item, we're going to always get in trouble. So we always have to kind of leave room for God to be able to work through our budget for his kingdom. And I thought that just saying that at the beginning of any business meeting kind of helped set the pace for anything we talked about, any numbers we show saying, hey, we are seeing this happening. However, we also had a lot of this stuff happening. Giving's been going up this year, and we've been seeing this trend of giving going up. That's great. However, we're in a deficit because we also had to pay to replace our heater, or we had to pay to kind of reline our parking lot. It was an expense that we didn't expect to do, but yep, here we are. We lost money because one of our outside groups that was paying rent decided to go somewhere else, and now we're no longer getting that money in anymore. So it's stuff like that where he was very flexible, and again, the key word, the big T word, transparent about everything, and really explained everything down to a T on what was happening and what was going on. It was very transparent about everything. So with that being said, yeah, so that's fundraising. So again, I do apologize to those who are listening to this episode and thinking, oh, how can we raise funds for our ministry or for this ministry, for our church? Sorry, this was not that episode. But maybe some of you, maybe you're in a church where you do these fundraisers and you realize, hey, they're not explicitly saying what this is for. We're kind of doing this fundraiser, but we don't really know where the funds is going. And I think if anything, it's very healthy just to say, hey, what is this? And to really buckle down and say, ask or demand the treasurer or demand the pastor or somebody saying, hey, there's this fundraiser, but it's not saying what it's for. Where's the money to this fundraiser? What's it going for? What's it supporting?
Well,
and really ask those questions.
If I could say one last thing about it.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Just to piggyback off what you're saying, like the one word that comes to mind is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I think people really want transparency, especially like if you're giving to a church, if you're giving to a nonprofit, if you're giving to some sort of cause or fund, people want to know where their money's going. And I don't think it's that hard to be transparent with folks and say, hey, your money's going to student ministry or to water heater or whatever it is. But as long as you're transparent, then go for it.
Yeah. And even that, like, I think we live in a time today where, before you could go participate in a fundraiser and you always knew it was going to go to something good. You always knew it was going to go to a children's ministry, youth ministry. But now I feel like in our culture where I feel like there's been so much things we've seen within, not only within like nonprofit or religious organizations, but just within big business or in politics, that people have not been being transparent with funds or anything else. I mean, there's that big thing that happened in Ohio just recently where householder and all that with the funds and the lobbyists, like
yes,
that big thing, that whole energy thing, like, yeah, that thing, like, oh, so even just with that, like, transparency is key.
Yes.
So again, be vigilant, be transparent, and those who are in leadership and pastors, listen to me. If you're doing a fundraiser to pay for a water heater and someone asks you, hey, what's this fundraiser going to? Don't give some like, oh, well, it's here to support the ministries of the church. And part of that, the ministries of the church is making sure we have running water. Like, don't like kind of sugarcoat, like, be just, hey, we had a water heater break, we paid for it, but because of that, we now have this deficit that we weren't expecting. So we're trying to do this fundraiser to kind of help close the gap. I don't think anybody would be like, oh, this is for a water heater. Like, if you explain it and again, transparent about everything, most people are going to be understanding and they're going to participate or give for your fundraiser because you are being transparent. So anyway, I'm Scott. Thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. Hopefully this has been fruitful, and we'll be back on again with another episode. Take care.